She rightly believes that people given a stable home can change their lives and the lives of those around them for the better. She refuses to put labels or signs on her places of residence, believing that those who live there within these sites have a right to have a home as truly a part of a community, not some extra special housing. And finally, she insists on the really extraordinary step of having her homes pay property taxes so that they are full participating members of the community. I urge you to listen carefully to one who is truly a leader, urging all to find effective solutions, to challenge the awful cliches that nothing can be done about the nation's problems. Kip Tiernan and her colleagues are hard at work, showing all of us the way. Ladies and gentlemen, Kip Tiernan.
The title of my lecture tonight is The Case for Compassion, Embracing America's Poor. But if it's all the same to you, I'd like to try to make a case for justice as well as compassion. Compassion means to me pity, charity, tolerance, mercy. Been there, did that, and it doesn't work. It was never enough. It was certainly no solution to homelessness. Having started Rosie's Place 22 years ago, homelessness is worse than ever now. We fixed it a little bit, but we really didn't change anything. But justice, I think, helps change conditions. It is the principle of moral rightness, the upholding of what is just or fair, a conformity to truth. St. Francis says we should get down on our knees and beg the forgiveness of the poor for our charity to them. America has denied the reality of homelessness and hunger, and now we are blaming the poor for their own conditions. We are suffering from cultural apartheid. In 1974, I watched women standing in soup lines at Pine Street Inn and Haley House, trying desperately to disguise themselves as men in order to get a meal to keep from starving to death. Having been told there were no homeless women in Boston, I started Rosie's Place. And 4 years later, I was told there were no hungry people in Boston either. And so I started the Greater Boston Food Bank. It was the denial of reality that inspired those two alternatives to homelessness and hunger. And things are no better now because Boston didn't change anything. Mario Cuomo said that one of the most telling things about the Reagan administration was that he made the denial of compassion respectable. And his inheritors have elevated cruelty to a virtue, and some of them even write books about it. We must ask ourselves always two questions when we see TV or we read the newspapers. Cui bono? Who benefits? And who set the terms of the debate? William Bennett, writer of one such book of virtues, when addressing the Conservative Heritage Foundation in 1986, said, and I quote, "And now American conservatism sets the terms of the debate." American conservatism. Virtuous? Compassionate? I don't think so. Ronald Reagan said, well, they go to shelters because, well, they like them. And Ed Meese, his right hand, added, and they go to soup kitchens because they're too cheap to go to restaurants. And their scientific junkie from Johns Hopkins later added, ketchup was a vegetable. Jean Donovan, one of the Maryknoll Four, who was raped and slaughtered by the USA-sponsored death squad in El Salvador on December 2, 1980, she said on the very eve before her execution, "What do you do when helping the poor is looked upon as an act of subversion?" Well, she certainly found out. Along with Dorothy Kazel and Ida Ford and Maura Clark, who had volunteered at Rosie's Place just that summer before. They all made the mistake of listening to those whose realities are created for them by those in power. Because when you stand with the poor, you are bound to absorb some of the violence directed toward them. Compassion to me means pulling the floating babies out of the rushing stream. Justice might mean going upstream to find out who the hell is throwing them in. The Bible tells us that justice is the sorting out of what belongs to whom and returning it to them. In the 70s, our own Gospels of Convenience mandated that we start shelters and soup kitchens. And we all created an ethic to meet and fit that new need rather than acknowledge the need for a fundamental ethic, one that demanded a standard of living for all of us that might preclude the need of a shelter or a soup kitchen. You know, we had compassion in the 60s. And in the 70s. But by the 80s, we were tired of looking at them, and we permitted ourselves the luxury of compassion fatigue. Having humanized the homeless in the 70s, it was okay to dehumanize them in the 80s. And by the 90s, we could, in all cynical virtue, demonize them. Blame them, in fact, for being poor. Poor people don't create poverty any more than hungry people create famine. Cui bono? Who benefited? Who set the terms of that debate? Walter Brueggemann, a biblical scholar, in his book, The Prophetic Imagination, says this: situations of cultural acceptance breed accommodating complacency. And we sadly add hostility. Surely no prophet can call us to a change of heart more powerfully than the oppressed. They certainly turned my life around almost 30 years ago, and they helped me to select the edge as my preferred geography. And I am profoundly grateful to them. I am also grateful to a dear mentor, Sister Marie Augusta Neal, a sociologist at Emmanuel College, who in Roxbury during the late 70s, I heard her say, "It's not enough to alleviate the suffering, Kippy. We must also try to help eliminate the causes for the suffering." Again in the 70s, at another Roxbury high school, Jesse Jackson said this to the students: "If they can define you, they can confine you. Don't ever let them do that." But we've all allowed that to happen. We've allowed others to define our reality, and we've been perfectly willing to be manipulated into a manageable glob by people who wouldn't touch a poor person with a barge pole. Beginning with a president called the great communicator, who said, well, they go to shelters because they like it. This was during his first term, the one that he was going to get the government off our backs, neglecting to point out, of course, that we would now have two governments, one for the privileged and one for the rest of us. He triggered an elaborate retreat from all social services, beginning with a series of deregulations. In 8 brutal, short years, 5 decades of important social change came to an agonizing halt. Self-indulgence became a passport to prosperity and privilege for far too many. Unspoken permission was given that established a new ethic, a market value ethic, including gentrification of our neighborhoods, in the name of free enterprise, which in turn created an environment in which shelters and soup kitchens would become alternatives to housing and food. By its refusal to build desperately needed low-income and public housing, the Reagan administration encouraged a shelter society to become, indeed, a shelter industry. The shame and the shambles of HUD testify to Reagan's commitment to the truly needy. His administration assisted in the creation now of millions of new poverty-stricken individuals and citizens. It allowed social Darwinism to replace social consciousness. It allowed personal individualism to replace the public good. And the need for housing was never greater. Under Jimmy Carter, incidentally, we got 300,000 units of public housing. And under Gerald Ford, we got 200,000. And under Ronald Reagan, we got 25,000. Initially designed specifically for poor housing needs, HUD reduced its budget 67% from 1982 to 1987. And $32 billion was removed. During this same period of getting the government off our back, unemployment rose, human services were lacerated, banks closed, farms and homes were foreclosed on, manufacturing almost came to a dead-up halt. The New World Order took over with junk bonds and the art of the deal and Ivan Bosky and Michael Milliken with his $75,000 an hour salary, and the S&L bankers, which Boston, incidentally, is still paying for, the ridiculous invasion of Grenada and Panama, the rise of the cost of living for the poor and the working class. And so while the private economy and inflated real estate patterns created more of a need of governmental assistance, the government chose instead to remove funds from the very agency created for such a disaster. In 1987, Philip Clay, from the Urban Studies of MIT, suggested that without a significant shift in policy in favor of affordable housing, by the year 2003, we might be seeing some 19 million homeless people in our streets. And just last month, the GOP mounted another deadly assault on a fundamental assumption behind federal housing for the past 50 years. That every year, the government should directly add to the stock of subsidized housing for the ever-growing ranks of the poor and the working class. Last summer, the Republicans eliminated an expansion of more than 60,000 new housing units, nearly all in the form of rent subsidies. Affordable shelter, they said, and I quote, is a luxury the budget cannot afford. Cui bono? Who benefits? Who set the terms of that debate? Moving right along, the combined loss of jobs created just by Digital, Scott, AT&T, and IBM last year totals 131,000 newly unemployed. Cui bono. Well, Wall Street is just about as happy as a pig in ice cream for that one. And as one Boston comic said, AT&T got cut 40,000 jobs, and their salaries went to Bob Allen, CEO of AT&T. Downsizing, read depression, has become the fastest growth industry since designer cookies. Social engineers from both parties let welfare fall apart. AFDC, incidentally, is 1% of the national budget. But welfare for the fortunate 500 goes on, thanks to your tax dollars. Busy building nest eggs for several American corporations overseas, last year to the tune of $1 billion. Last year, CEOs across the country got increases of up to 30%, but we can't have a minimum wage increase. Cui bono. Hannah Arendt referred to the German Holocaust as the epitome of the banality of evil. Well, make no mistake about it. We too are suffering a Holocaust. Our poor are suffering a slow, painful death by dismissal, and the mythical safety net has become instead a funnel through which millions are being thrust. It is a Holocaust of neglect, of silence, of acceptance, of accommodation, and in all cynical, pious virtue, we can say America is finally cleaning up its act by getting rid of the debris, the poor. Like it or lump it, we have become a third world. 15 years ago, you could probably make the mortgage or the rent payments, make the car payments, get a kid through school, have a doctor, maybe a small savings account, and in summer go on a 2-week vacation. No more. That's gone. That's gone for most of you. This administration doesn't care any more about the middle class than they do about the poor. So it's time we joined the poor. I find myself missing the 60s, as I'm sure many of you do. We had heroes and heroines. We had Rosa Parks and Dorothy Day and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. Today we have Madonna and Michael Jackson. Walter Brueggemann tells us that we must learn to bring hurt into public expression because it is the most visceral announcement that things are wrong. Or, as James Carville says, we're right, they're wrong. Today, unfortunately, the facts has replaced the fury. The press release has replaced the passion. The company retreat has replaced the rage. The computer has replaced the confrontation. I miss the critical voice we had. That in-your-face moral outrage of the 60s. I miss the collegial, communal, collective caring. We had a civil rights movement. We had an anti-war movement. We had a welfare rights movement. We had visions then. Today we have agendas, and it's different. A movement means moving toward something. a vision, a goal. Today we are moving further and further away from each other. We have no community. We have no critical voice. Many of us have no hope, no fury, no passion. And shelters and soup kitchens have become the burnt offerings of the 20th century. They're not enough. And the Old Testament whistleblower, Amos, told us that. Let righteousness flow like a river that never runs dry. We need to recreate community, a society in which it is easier to remain human, or we will truly lose our very souls. And while we're on the subject of souls, can we please dismiss the so-called Christian Coalition? Speaking of agendas and vision, a group whose gospels of exclusion show no mercy, take no prisoners, no redemption or hope unless you support all of their ideas. You can show your faith by sending money. To care is to count ourselves among the truly blessed. To care is to know we love and we are loved. That we're all precious and our lives mean something to somebody. I remember when we all cared. A black shepherd led us all into the light of reason, but he was cut down demonstrating for the garbage workers of Memphis, his last official act of defiance against the powerful. There is a stone tablet on the outside of the Lorraine Motel room where Martin Luther King was assassinated. And on it is a phrase from the book of Genesis. And it reads, "Behold, here comes the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of his dreams." Martin, the original Rainbow Man. His dream deferred, and our streets awash now with the blood of our children, our mothers, our sisters, our sons. This past winter in Boston was a killer for the lost, the lonely, and the disappeared. And the cold Boston snow just didn't give a soft white damn. Oh, Lord, we need justice, not mere compassion. We need to remember a time when our kids could grow up, for God's sakes, strong, healthy, and hopeful. We need to remember a time when we had neighbors who loved us and we weren't afraid of them. We've all had a face full of the abuse of power. We must begin to care again, to make demands again, to stand up and be counted again. Let me quote you something written almost, 30 years ago, 1966. Let America realize that self-scrutiny is not treason. Self-examination is not disloyalty. Let those who would be so articulate in defending the territorial integrity be equally articulate in defending the constitutional rights of our citizens and their freedom of expression. In this country, people are being denied sufficient food, housing, healthy surroundings, and adequate medical care. They are shackled to poverty. Let there be a place where we can reason, hopefully, together, or at least in quiet, to the voice of conscience. Richard Cardinal Cushing's Pastoral Letter, 1964. It could have been written yesterday. Václav Havel, in his summer meditation, said, "If we do not build a state that is humane and moral and intellectual and cultural, we will never build a democratic state." And the only thing I will not concede, that it might be meaningless to strive for a good cause. It is never meaningless to do what you believe to be honest and just, even if you lose. So then, we must try to move from being do-gooders to being good doers. And that's much harder. People love you when you open a shelter or a soup kitchen, but they don't like it at all when you keep asking, why are there still so many shelters and soup kitchens out here? We need to be recommitted to community, to move again toward the common good. We are reaping what we have sown, and it is, you must agree, a bitter, bitter harvest. Coming out of a Christian Judaic tradition myself, when asked what I do, I usually say, I am an urban minister without portfolio. But like all ministers, I want to help bring wholeness to the human spirit. That's what ministers do, what they're supposed to do. When I went to Roxbury in the late 60s, I was in advertising and public relations, and I was invited to call the press for a closing event of the old St. Philip's on Harrison Avenue. The church had been sold to the BRA. This was the time of the Great White Flight from the inner city. And like the demise of several other churches, only a handful of parishioners remained, mostly black, not wealthy. In its infinite wisdom, the church was pulling out also. Picture this. A hot August night, the church crowded. It was called an evening for oppressed peoples. The Black Panthers were there, having just started a breakfast program for the kids in Roxbury. The farm workers were there, recently arrived to begin their grape boycott. The elfin, tiny Dan Barrigan, Jesuit priest, was out on bail from participating in a draft raid in Catonsville, Maryland, was there. The church was filled with hundreds of people, black and white and young and old, and well-off and poor, a large smattering of urban and suburban types, nuns and priests recently awakened with the new ecumenism of the 60s, and the thrill of being part of the new and splendid movement begun by Pope John the 23rd. And I remember thinking, geez, this is where the church should be. And then I remember saying to myself, I have just passed through a door and there is no turning back. The old St. Philip's, later to be torched and torched and torched some more, and still later to become, incidentally, the new site of Rosie's Place many years later, after we had been torched on Washington Street. Talk about baptism by fire. An epiphany for me, if you will, or at the very least a divine inconsistency. Surely a sudden manifestation of the essence or meaning of something that made sense. Later that hot August night, Jack White, who was the pastor of the old St. Philip's, took me aside and he said, you know, Kippy, and this is the way he said, you know, Kippy, poor people need advertising and public relations and all that good stuff, but we can't afford it. So why don't you come with us to St. Philip's and join our team ministry? I can't promise you much money, but you can do anything you want, and Kippy, you'll have fun. An irresistible invitation. And I grabbed at it, and I slid out of my surroundings and into the Bury like a duck to water. We moved from St. Philip's to an old row house on Warwick Street. Cardinal Cushing gave us this house, and we called it St. Philip Warwick House, a kind of tribute to secularity. And my happy home, incidentally, for the next 14 years. The neighborhood, or in current parlance, hood, was all black. And the people there treated me, this hip, white, smart aleck, with unforgettable kindness. And they said to me, Kippy, nothing much is going to change because you're here, but we're glad you're here. I, who had all the answers to everything that plagued the Bury, then began to learn what the questions were. And I learned from the people that it is truly all one struggle. And I should learn to simply stay in that struggle and struggle to stay in that struggle. That is our privilege. That is our highest calling. That the struggle is all. And in that struggle, we would succeed, we would fail. We'd be selfish and we'd be noble. And we'd be human. And that we must believe that as long as we struggled together, nothing or no one could separate us from the will and the love of God. There, I said it. No, I am not a born again. It actually worked for me the first time. But I learned to develop together with my sisters and brothers and my friends and my family in Roxbury to listen to what the victims of bad social and public policy have to say. Listen to the victims. I learned with them to develop a political theology, to listen for the signs and the cues of the times and respond. After all, isn't that what Newt Gingrich and Jerry Falwell do? Of course, they are the new centurions with all the charm and the virtue of a chainsaw. And then I remembered how sweet were the words of Martin Luther King upon receiving the Nobel Prize. Listen up. I refuse to accept the idea that man is mere flotsam and jetsam up the river of life which surrounds us. I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the daybreak of peace can never be a reality. I believe that wounded justice lying prostrate on the blood-flowing streets of our nations can be lifted up from the dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of men. When our days become dreary with low, hovering clouds, and our nights become darker than 1,000 midnights, we will know that we are living in the creative turmoil of a genuine civilization struggling to be born. Martin had stubborn hope, which fortunately he passed on to a lot of us, including me. Like many of us, I too had marched with Martin from Roxbury to Boston Common in the late 50s, proud, eager, hopeful. And another time, years later, I marched to the same Boston Common to be with my sisters and brothers to hear the ghastly news of his assassination. Our dreams crumbled to dust, our rainbows clouded over. Our peaceful revolution came to a painful, mutilated halt. Who benefits now? We need a new revolution, one that challenges and confronts those ideological, social, and economic and political arrangements that support greed and racism and classism in our streets. Some of our heroes have been slain, but we remember what they said and we go forward, stumbling frequently. But we cannot ever forget that once there was a Camelot for all of us. And we cannot make a case for mere compassion. Been there, did that, didn't work. Not enough. Let us instead make a case for justice as well. We try to do that at Rosie's place, and we think we have become a part of the solution, and we are no longer just another shelter. And we still don't take a dime from the city, the state, or the feds. After all, when you are no longer a fashionable agony, they are the first people to say, sorry, goodbye. So we don't have to put ourselves in the position of being rejected. Our women have had, God knows, enough rejection in their lives. We've been permanently housing women actually since 1980, and very few people know that. Now we have 3 homes they live in permanently. And last year we found 150 apartments for women who come to us, and 16 women live with us on Harrison Avenue, site of the old St. Philip's, on a continuum of a week to a year, whatever it takes, to help them find their own destinies and create their own realities. Our love, you see, for the women who share their lives with us is unconditional. That's what I call family values. It's all about hope, and it's about making your dreams a reality. It's about time we all reflected on our realities. And we must ask ourselves, as Reagan asked us, are we better off? I don't think so. We've been misinformed in this so-called informational age. We've been manipulated. And again, as Dan Berrigan said, we have been lied to. We are being lied to. We will continue to be lied to. This is the declension of our lives. Face it, we have been mugged big time by our false prophets, who are busy creating our realities and redefining our lives. But there are windows of opportunity. I can touch it, I can feel it, I can taste it, and I couldn't get up in the morning if I didn't believe it. I also believe that we care, that we do too give a damn, still. And I have this enormous faith in you and in me that somehow we're going to make it through the night together. Once again, we need to have faith in ourselves, to believe that we can change things together. We need to remember that it is all one struggle, a common struggle. To reclaim the moral vision, we have to remember what it was. One nation indivisible with liberty and justice for all. We may come from different experiences, but we must learn to operate out of a common base, to seek the truth together, to speak the truth together, and we've done it before, we can do it again. We must learn to capture the outrage of people not fully articulated, of the real reality, and once we do, we need to hold that structural analysis against division and let our principles, not our politicians, be our guide. Action planning comes from a sense of calling, generated by vision and analysis. It might well be the beginning of our own theology of liberation, because it will be the beginning of the radicalization of the privileged, and that, my friends, is us. Someone once said that religion is for those who are afraid of hell, and spirituality is for those who have been there. The poor surely cry out to us from their own hell. Let us stand with them and not be afraid. Remember that old Chris Christopherson line, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. I'm not a very good process person. I always want to skip to the chase. But I've learned that you really need time to think. You need to have new knowledge and new ways of addressing your value base. Can we do it? Of course we can. We need this time to think of ourselves, I truly believe this, as the new diaspora, to begin this spiritual and cultural revolution. The poor need us with them again, and we need them. We need to have the same kind of passion and fury and hope and belief and humor that we used to have in order to better understand our own alienation and our own loneliness and cynicism. You and I hold the key to our prisons of despair. Come join the new conspiracy of compassion and justice. Conspiracy is a wonderful word. It comes from two Latin words, conspirare, meaning to breathe together. Isn't that wonderful? All we have to do is turn the key, open it up, stand back to see once again the laughing face of the prophet Jesus inviting us to be free. There's an old African proverb, until the lions have historians, tales of hunting will always glorify the hunter. We can rewrite history. Those of us on the urban scene have the opportunity to be evangelized by poor people. The disaffected, the disillusioned, the disappeared. As we said before, many years ago, we see here in the city the forces of evil and power colliding in the rawest of forms, and we have a chance to challenge this force, this evil. We have the rare and sacred privilege to see the faces of the disinherited and the sad, frightened, bewildered faces of the young, the old, the lame, the halt, the blind, and God knows the crazy. The true cross of the prophet Jesus is the most radical condemnation of an unjust world. It is here in the city that one discovers that history is created, if not by the spiritually mature, then by the spiritually depraved and degenerate. It is here at the core where prayerful hands become clenched fists, and the presence of God is most discernible in rage. I have this rage. I also have this hope. I see our most important role as taking sides with the poor and embracing them. I have this stubborn hope that somehow we're all going to make it through the night together, because somebody is out there. Some kind of redeeming prophet I choose to call Jesus. Listening, watching, waiting for us to stand up and be counted again. In his own time, the greatest hindrance to accepting his message was respect for society's leaders and its institutions. And he believed in none of that. In his time, a radical theology came about from his listening to the most deprived, least listened to community of misfits in all of Judea. Today's theology and politics have to come from today's Galileans. The goal he was hoping to achieve with his raggedy little bundle of outcasts was not merely to obtain eternal life, but rather to transform society. And he did. And we have that same opportunity. We, of the new diaspora, we need a revolution. Let it begin here. If not you, who? If not now, when? Thank you.
Well, I think all of us feel like we've been at one of those special moments when someone who has vision and passion and belief enters our lives, and it's reminiscent for all of us of times in the past when we've been able to get out of our own barriers and our own tunnels and move forward to do something. Surely this magnificent woman next to me is capable of that, and for some of us did it this evening. Kip, most of us operate in small worlds, and we rarely get a chance to look forward and see a vision. That was the power of King's leadership, which is he said, right over there, across the mountain, we will reach a place where this will get better. Do you have that model from working so intimately with the poor and disenfranchised that's possible, that we can overcome class differences, racial differences? Can we really husband enough strength to take on this enormous issue and succeed?
Oh, God Almighty. I would certainly hope so. I think that one of the models, and it's certainly a model we use at Rosie's Place, was something that Melania Cass said a long time ago. If we cannot do great things, perhaps we can do small things in a great way. And I think that that's one of the most important things that any of us have the opportunity to hear. That's a wonderful line. We may not move mountains, but I think little by little, one by one, step by step, we can do it, and I think we can do it together. I think that when blacks and whites started pulling away from each other, when whites started pulling away from blacks, actually, in the 70s, it was a big mistake, because whoever is out there directing our destinies looked upon that as a victory, as a clear victory. We need to be with each other. We were with each other, and interestingly enough, it worked. And I truly believe it can work again, Henry. I have to believe that. I can't get up tomorrow if I don't believe that.
What can people in this room, if they so choose, do to help Rosie's Place or to create similar models?
Well, similar models is the key, I think. People frequently say that, well, what can we do for Rosie's Place? And I say, well, where do you live? And they say, Wellesley. Well, I said, have you started something in Wellesley? Because I know there are homeless people there. And again, it's that denial of reality. They say, well, no, we don't have any homeless people. Well, Boston said that to me 22 years ago. There's no homeless women in Boston. So I think in your own neighborhoods, wherever there is some kind of oppression going on, whether it's a street light that someone on the other side of town has been yelling about for 20 years, and they still haven't got it because they don't have any power, I think you have to make sure to help them get that street light. I think that in our own neighborhoods, we have rotten things that are happening. And we say, well, he'll do it, or she'll do it. I think we have to band together. We used to do that. We all used to get the idea. When I was a kid growing up, and I was a child of the Depression, there'd be women in our neighborhood looking out the window, and they say, my Christian name is certainly, I was baptized Mary Jane. Let that be a secret with this. We're just among them. I was named after both grandmothers. But there would be women in the neighborhood, and they would look out the window, and they'd say, Mary Jane, what are you doing? I'm going to tell your mother. This was community.
Play devil's advocate. This might be in this audience preaching to the converted. I don't know what list GBH used, but in fact, I'm sure there are 4 or 5 people in here and saying, oh, God, there they go again, whining about their conditions, and they will never change because they won't do it themselves. What do you say to those?
Well, I think it's like saying, in order to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you got to have boots. And I think a lot of people don't have what it takes to take that first step. You need jobs, you need education, you need to live somewhere, you need to have food on the table.
One of the things you do in Rosie's, do you toughen people to the challenge? Do you say, to do this, you have to get ready, you have to be able to contribute to this?
No, I think that we like to think of ourselves at Rosie's Place as partners. We try to provide a base to begin again. But I don't think we do anything for them. I think we do it with them, and I think it is better. I think it works better that way. The most important thing about a place like Rosie's Place, or a neighborhood, you got to know what the questions are. They're more important than the answers, I think, much of the time. Well, what do I know? I don't know.
Speaking of questions, we'll segue with that to going into the audience, which I hope is awake, alert, and ready to challenge us.
And I'm not afraid to say I don't know, incidentally.
How have you been able to maintain your commitment to the work that you've done for a quarter of a century?
Very easy. I love what I'm doing. I love my life. I love, well, Jack White was right when he said, Kippy, you'll have fun. You know, I've never, you really need a sense of humor. And we laugh a lot, and it's always at our own expense. And that's okay. Also, to know that you're just not going to do it by Thursday. I never burned out. I don't expect to burn out because I'm not going to solve anything by myself to begin with. And I feel, I don't know, I guess I just feel comfortable. It's not the brooding intellectual approach to the struggle that counts. The struggle is just simply being there and being a part of it. And it's not your struggle or my struggle or his struggle. It's all one struggle. I mean, with God Almighty, we must know that now. The struggle to survive is an important struggle. And it's affecting everybody, except the rich people.
The rich are always
They're
doing
doing
differently.
fine. Well, the rich will always be with us. You know that.
This young man over here.
Yes, sir.
I'm here with my high school, Fenway Middle College, and we recently did a report on homelessness where we went around the city and did field research and did interviews with different organizations. And I was wondering how you felt, you know, do you think schools should play a part in the education of homelessness, or do you think it should be more like government, maybe?
No, I do. I spoke to a bunch of high school students at the John Kennedy Library about 10 years ago. And there were kids that came in from all over Massachusetts. And they were there to learn about volunteerism and, you know, doing good things and bringing your clothes and whatnot. One kid said to me, one young man said to me, I know about volunteering and I know about, you know, doing, he said, but what do you do tomorrow? Important question. What happens tomorrow? So what that young man was able to do was to go from what is to what if or what will happen. So I think that high school students are an important key to that educational thing that we've got, because you are the ones that are going to be faced with our problems. We blew it. You students are the ones that are going to have to deal with our errors. And I wish you luck, and I think you're incredible.
Kip, early in your talk, you mentioned problems of unemployment and downsizing. And yet we have elections coming up, and we hear all these rosy projections about how the unemployment rate is down, when in reality there are many, many people out of work, especially older people, people over 50, who've been out of work for a long time, whose prospects are kind of dim. How do we get the word out that these, I guess you'd call them disappeared people, exist?
I think you got to stand up and yell. I think you got to get a lot of people who have been laid off to yell with you, because it's not just happening to 5 or 6 people in this room. It's happened to 5 or 6 people that you know outside of this room. That's a lot of people.
I want to thank you personally. I think you are terrific once again.
You too.
And we can keep talking now, but we'll allow the cameras to go to sleep for the night.
That'd be nice. And the lights as well.
if you will.
Go for him. Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, Numi, coming up next, we're going to take you on a bear hunt.
But this one is for the bear's sake. We'll explain in just a moment.
Around here, this is where you drive, and this is where you save. It's the Chrysler and Plymouth